And welcome to RealAg Live, everybody. I'm your host, Shaun Haney. Thanks a lot for tuning in today here on this Thursday. We're going to have a lot of fun today doing a bit of a deep dive into a new book that I have enjoyed so much. I want you to participate in the discussion, take comments, questions, not really necessarily an ag topic, but it's really a topic about Canada. And I think we're really going to be able to do a bit of self-reflection here, whether you're living in Canada as a Canadian or you are abroad as an expat. Today's discussion, I think you're really going to identify with. So if you do want to participate in the discussion, you have a question or a comment, all you have to do is enter it in the chat box, whether you're watching on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, or Twitch, and we'll get to as many of them as possible. So let's bring in today's guest, and it is John Stackhouse. He is the author of the book Planet Canada. I got it right here. How our expats are shaping the future. John, how are you?
I'm well, thanks, Sean. It's great to be with you again, even from a distance.
Yeah, you joined me it's got to be probably about a year ago for a Mind Your Farm Business podcast. You had written a paper for our study for RBC called, what was it, Farmer 4.0, correct?
Yeah, that's right, I think. And I was in Lethbridge, if I recall correctly.
Yes, absolutely. Boy, the world has changed in that 13 months.
Yeah, in fact, my last trip outside of Ontario was to Red Deer, Alberta. So as much as I love Red Deer, I hope I get to get out of Ontario again sometime in the future and to other parts of the world.
Yeah, for sure. So, John, give us some background on yourself. I mentioned RBC, but you've definitely done some other things. I would introduce yourself to the audience.
Yeah, I've been at RBC for the last 6 years. And before that, I was in journalism for 30 years, most of it, 25 years of it, at the Globe and Mail. I was editor-in-chief up until 2014, previously ran the business section. And through the 1990s, which is when the idea for this book inspired me, I was based in New Delhi, India, for close to 8 years and got to travel all over Asia and Africa, covering extraordinary events, but also coming across really interesting Canadians doing pretty extraordinary things as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting. When you talk to some companies abroad around the world, they'll always make jokes about how, man, you Canadians, you're everywhere. What inspired you to write this book?
Well, it was partly that those years in the 90s of being abroad, traveling through dozens of countries, meeting these incredible Canadians who were kind of unknown back in our own country. And I thought, that's weird. I didn't really appreciate that about Canada, that we had so many Canadians living, working, studying abroad, and really successful in the most part for what they did or at what they did. And then after 9/11, I noticed the country was getting a little harsher in our collective attitude towards Canadians abroad. Thought of it as a brain drain, thought of people as somehow disloyal to the country for leaving, and it would on the whole be better if they were on Canadian soil. And as I looked around the world, I thought the rest of the world's going in a different way. And it's not just one or two countries here or there. Like every country is developing a strategy around its global population and taking advantage of people who are living in different places. So I thought, I've got to help Canada understand the challenge here, and thought this book project would be a good way at it, because to me, this is one of our great opportunities for the 2020s, because we're getting smaller relative to the rest of the world. That's going to continue. There's going to be fewer percentage-wise Canadians, less of the world's GDP. So how do we punch above our weight, like way above our weight, is going to be a big challenge coming out of the pandemic. And there's a bunch of things we can do, but taking advantage of this little stealth force, and it's not little, it's like 2 million people out there who are, as I said, they're usually amazing at what they do, and they want to help Canada. But we're not really doing a whole lot about helping them help us.
Now, and what was interesting is you went through different conversations that you had with different expats living all over the world. We're not talking about people that are in like a junior sales role working at, Google, for example. We're talking about Canadians that a lot of people don't even realize are probably Canadian, They are people that have had success inside some of our most familiar companies, and have had high profile, very, very impactful jobs and roles inside those companies. These are expats that are extremely successful.
Yeah, and it says something about our country that we kind of fade into or sneak into different environments, which is why we tend to be more successful than most nationalities. And I heard this from so many different Canadians in different walks of life. There was this great couple, the Stowskis from Southern Ontario, who are now they moved to Korea and now they're in Tokyo. They are a couple of the biggest YouTube stars in Asia. They have this massive following with that's their business is a YouTube channel, and they've turned it into a whole business line. And they said to me, their secret sauce is they blend into cultures. They, as they said in the book, when people say take your shoes off at the door, we take our shoes off at the door, and we don't think that's weird. That's just if that's what you do in your country, okay, we'll do that. That can be a bit of a weakness that we go along to get along, but it also can be a real strength because we respect other cultures and they respect us as a result. And as I met these interesting Canadians in all walks of life, as you said, who were in the high ranks or at the top of all sorts of organizations, they always came back to that point that I respected the culture that I began to work in, and then they respected me. And then I discovered that Canadians are among the only people who are like that. And we can become bridge builders or connectors. We're great networkers because we connect, the Chinese and the Japanese in Asia, or the Germans and French in Europe. It's usually a Canadian who's doing that. And that becomes kind of a superpower for whatever you're doing. And we don't take advantage of that as a country. So when we think of the challenges that we've got, and it could be, to our previous conversation, something like agriculture, we're going to face challenges on the ag trade front, probably forever, but certainly in the years ahead. How do we add to our our mobilization out there, connected Canadians, saying not just going to go do our bidding for us, but help us understand those markets. There's all sorts of Canadians still in China doing really important stuff, or in India doing incredible stuff, or Indonesia. How do we kind of make them our key advisors? Because they do want to help the country.
You refer to some of the Canadians that have left to work abroad as outliers, and I have a piece highlighted here where you say there isn't an infrastructure for outliers in Canada. Expats are people who wake up one day and say it's not happening here in Canada. And a little bit later on, you talk about how Canadians often choose the certainty of good over the prospect of great. In the variables of Bob McClure's formula, we have plenty of purpose, but not so much risk, which means we settle for small adventures, even in the valley. Talk about that. Explain that.
Yeah, so Bob McClure is one of the great Canadians of all time. He was a Canadian missionary in China in the 1920s and 30s. Went on to become moderator of the United Church of Canada, and he had this formula of risk leads to big adventure. And he felt that Canadians needed to take more risk. This is back in the 30s, to have those big adventures. And I thought, as I reflected on that, we tend to be a bit of a risk-averse people. And as a result, we settle for the small adventures in life and in the world rather than the big adventures. And expats, by their very nature, are people willing to take risks. They've done it with their own lives. To leave your country, to leave your family, your social network, and go to a foreign land, that's a big bet. And then to stay there, you've got nothing to fall back on except your own strengths. And I was always impressed with expats, how they kind of came to realize, whether they were in Silicon Valley or Dubai or Hong Kong, they realized when they were out there on their own, and they had to prove themselves, but they proved it, and they were stronger as 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 a result. Now, in the Valley, it's really interesting because Silicon Valley, that is, because there's an enormous number of Canadians there, at least 250,000 Canadians, big number of software engineers, but also investors and company operators. Google is, many parts of Google are run by Canadian. In fact, one of the former executive chairman, Eric Schmidt, told me if Google were a country, it would be Canada, because it just kind of operated on that open and respectful but mutually accommodating basis. Is a bit of the Google culture. And Canadians, I've talked to a lot of them in the Valley to try to understand why are so many of you here. Geography, proximity is one reason. But it was full of people who wanted to take that chance, who kind of woke up one day and said, I'm willing to roll the dice, if you will, a bit, and go to a place where the failure rate is much higher. And that's very exciting, but the reward is also much higher. And I think one of our challenges, I do a lot of work on ag tech. My day job at RBC, we're trying to understand better the innovation economy and how technology is transforming everything. And that includes agriculture, which we think is an enormous opportunity for Canada. And if I can just take that as an example, when we think about our ag strategy for the 2020s, and when I was with you previously, we talked about our RBC report, Farmer 4.0, which looks at kind of the future of ag tech in a Canadian context. When we think about the next gen of ag for this country, I think one of the missing pieces for us is this stealth force of Canadians. How do we identify the Canadians in the Valley who are maybe not directly in ag tech, but certainly start with them, but may have a proximity to ag tech who can help us there? And then Canadians in different key markets around the world who can help us really bulk up our strategy. They will bring that risk quotient that Bob McClure talked about. They will probably, with expats, I find you often say what your plan is, and the response will be, that's really good, and you should 10x it. You should multiply it by 10, and then you'll be ambitious. And that's, I think, one of our challenges here at home is we need to think in that 10x vein, and these expats are people who can help us be that force, or they can be that force multiplier for us.
So you talk about how we need to organize them better and be more and connect more with them as they are abroad for strategic reasons, as you just gave a really good example. Are there other countries that are doing a much better job at this to keep a handle on, okay, citizens of our country that are living abroad, we're connected, we're using them as a part of our strategy going forward? Who's doing it well?
Yeah, I look at dozens of countries in the book, from Italy and Ireland to the United States, which we think has turned inward, but it's actually got a more ambitious expat strategy, I argue, than we do. But maybe the most relevant ones for Canada are Australia and New Zealand. Now, they're distant island nations, but they have a culture of getting, especially younger people, out into the world. In fact, they underwrite it. They say, like, get out as soon as you're done high school or college. Go for a walkabout, and come back in a year or 5 years, or don't come back at all. But if you don't come back, you will still be Australian or Kiwi, and we want you to stay connected with the country, and we want you to help the country. But two other countries that I think are so we should learn from them the importance of encouraging our young people to leave Canada and experience the world. They'll come back, most of them, and they'll be way stronger Canadians for it, and Canada will be stronger as a result. But I also studied Israel and Singapore, much smaller countries, or slightly smaller countries in many ways, and was curious how they both tried to get expats to come back in the latter part of the 20th century, and they didn't succeed. They discovered that once people have left, gone to do a graduate degree somewhere or work for an international company somewhere. They get married, they have kids, they settle down. They're less inclined to come back. And both countries, Taiwan went through the same experience. That, okay, let's not try so hard to get them to come back. Great if they do, but let's work on those folks who are not going to come back and find ways to harness them and their networks for us. And it's this network effect that I try to stress in the book. Too often as Canadians, we think in an analog way, one equals one. So when a Canadian leaves, we think it is a loss of one. It's binary. The network thinker realizes that it's not a loss of one, it's a gain of 10, because that one Canadian going out there is suddenly plugged into 10 new people who we wouldn't have been connected before. So as long as we keep the connection, and that onus is on us as a country, we're actually gaining 10 people, not losing one person. And that was, I learned that from Israel and Singapore, but also from people in the Valley who said that is the very nature of innovation thinking, is that 10x force multiplier concept, which I think for us as a country, we're only 40 million people. We're small compared to many countries, and we should learn from Israel and Singapore because they're even smaller. But they're saying, hey, we're gonna act like we're much bigger than a country of 5 million.
In the book, you use James Cameron as an example. I think you said he's been gone for 40 years. I would never expect James Cameron to come back after all the things that he has done. But he, recently, from an ag perspective, he has been investing in Canada. You mentioned that he still sees himself very much attached to his Canadian roots. I found that sort of, maybe that's a really good example you're just talking about, is keeping in touch and having that network.
Yeah.
And he can, someone like James Cameron, come on, he can connect lots of dots for people.
Yes. That's not a gain of 10. That's like a gain of 10 million people when you have James Cameron on your side, the director of Titanic and so many great films, really the master of the blockbuster in our time. And he is still maintained his Canadian identity. He, has issues with the United States government politically, but yeah, he's not going to move back, I don't think, to Canada. But in a way, that's not the point of the issue I'm trying to stress. Is exactly what you're saying. Let's put him to work for us as a country, and he wants to. So he's invested in the protein sector in Saskatchewan because he's vegan, but he's absolutely convinced that one of the great economic opportunities of the next couple of decades is the protein revolution. He thinks millions or billions of people are going to shift from animal protein to plant protein. Now, whether he's right or not on that, I think we can agree the future for plant protein is pretty significant. And Canada is a major and really good plant protein producer. And in places like Saskatchewan, we can produce a lot more of it. And this is where I get excited with ag tech. So Jim Cameron came back on his own, just as a business guy, found the investment opportunity, did it on his own. He's not looking for government support. He doesn't need a photo op. That's the last thing he needs. But we need him. And we now need to say, okay, Jim Cameron's invested in Saskatchewan. This is on the public record. He's a champion of Canadian plant protein. Hey, how do we get him, like out to China or India or whenever he's in those places, standing up for Canada and saying, hey world, if you are buying plant protein, buy from Canada because it's better than anyone else's product. Just a small example of thousands that we can take advantage of.
I always think of Canadian, pretty good at self-deprecating humor, which makes us very kind of, people can latch on to that when you're in a group setting with people from around the world. The other thing that you hit on from a computer science standpoint in the book is that it's also the way we teach our students. And you use computer science as the example, where a computer science student at MIT, for example, may be like at the top rung. I think you said we're a couple keystrokes below them, but we teach in a much more broader sense. And so it makes us a little bit more well-rounded. And I'm using this kind of a metaphor for all Canadians, a little bit more well-rounded. So it's easier for us to adapt into many different situations and circumstances. We're not one-dimensional.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. We are not one-dimensional. And I picked up that point from a Canadian in the Valley, Shuman Ghoshmajumder, who was a computer scientist, brilliant guy. From Southern Ontario, ended up at Google, has run a couple of companies in the cybersecurity space. And, we were talking about his story, but then we got on to his hiring strategy for his company. And he said, whenever I get a resume for a computer scientist or a computer science grad, and it has Canadian on it, I throw it into the inbox because I know they'll be good. If you graduate in computer science from a Canadian university, doesn't matter if it is U of T or Lethbridge or University of Victoria, you're going to be really good. And he speaks as a master of it. And he said, yeah, I can hire from Stanford and MIT as well. And they'll probably be better, but they will be really better at only one aspect of coding. And they'll be the best in the world at that. My challenge is I can't teach them to do other things. And when I'm running a company, I don't know where we're going to be in 2 years. And what I love about Canadians, was his point, is that I can teach them. They're willing to learn, but they have an ability as well to learn from others. So it's a bit of that humility at play, but that humility actually has a real market value that we need to kind of amp up. And I would stress this to young people. I mean, use that as a selling point for yourself, that you're willing to learn from others, because that's going to be one of the great skills of the 2020s.
Well, and there's another side to this, and I'm sure there's some people in the audience that are thinking this, and I'll pull this out of the book. They'd left to take on the world and yet still contributed to Canada in ways most Canadians did not see or perhaps appreciate. Our challenge as a country is not whether we can keep them down on the farm or bring them home, but whether we can support them and connect them with the rest of our diaspora to shape the 2020s and Canada's place in it. Do you think that we should be working harder to keep... I'm sure there's people that are saying we should be keeping these people home. If we had kept all of those tech people here in Canada, Canada would be like a tech, like we would be a superstar. We would put Silicon Valley in the dust. What do you say to those people?
You got to have both, but focus more on brain circulation than on brain gain or brain drain. People go out, they come back, and they're better actually to go out and come back. That is true, and scientists will tell you this. They need to go out to different centers. They need to go to different clusters. Some will come back, some won't. Let's take advantage of both. Doesn't mean we should just roll over and say, hey, everyone get out. there's no future here. But let's not be despondent about people leaving. It strikes me as curious that whenever there's evidence of a so-called brain drain, and I spend part of the book looking at the history of the brain drain debate, it was usually exaggerated. Now with the benefit of history, whenever the country got worked up in the 1950s and the 1990s, as two examples of a brain drain, the data now in hindsight was not that big a deal. It was not some massive loss to the country. What we should have done is focus more on using those people to our advantage. One gentleman I got to interview, he passed away after I interviewed him. A grand old physicist at MIT, had left Montreal in the late 40s to do grad work at MIT and became one of the leading physicists in the world, but certainly in the US, nuclear physicists, helped develop the US nuclear program through the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Always wanted to help Canada. in nuclear physics. And he said, yeah, no one ever called me. I put my hand up. No one ever reached out. I could have helped Canada in all sorts of ways. And I thought, what a sad note for an incredible human, brilliant scientist. And so, how do we learn from that? And think about the thousands of Canadians out there now who have their hand up, saying, "I want to help," and let's get them to help. Maybe they'll come back. Maybe their kids will come back. That would be great. But if they don't, let's make that great as well.
Lindsay has pointed out, very close similarities when you think about going away, and maybe you'll come back, maybe you won't. It's we hear that a lot in terms of young kids on the farm. Just if you want to come back to the farm, that's great, but go work somewhere else first. Like get some experience in industry. Maybe go work on a farm in Australia. Gain those experiences so that when you come back, your skill set is even more broader, has a lot more depth to it, and you're just so much more valuable to what's happening on that farm. It actually works in the case of when we're talking about just Canada in general.
I absolutely. And I was impressed in doing the Farmer 4.0 research, talking to Australians who do have more of a walkabout culture for their farm youth. That's fairly typical for a kid after school who's grown up on a farm to go on a walkabout. And yes, maybe work on a farm in Canada or the US or in Europe, and then bring the skills, maybe some of the tech knowledge back. We do some of that here. We can do more.
When you talk about the melding process, a lot of Canadians are working in the US, of course, as you've discussed. As I've talked to some expat friends, they have said to me that one of the first things they drop, is their Canadianism. So they every conversation is not about like, I'm from Toronto. They meld immediately, and if they've moved to Minneapolis or they've moved to Denver, that's where they're living in that moment. They're not always talking about where they came from to fit in as quickly as possible. Is that kind of what you heard?
I did, but I think it's changing. There was a certain almost sheepishness, maybe it's an embarrassment of Canada, especially in the US, but also in other parts of the world. You feel like, we're not the most sophisticated country in the world, so people don't play it up. I think in the last decade, particularly, Canada's become kind of a hipper place to the world. We're a happening place, and maybe that started with the Vancouver Olympics. Maybe there was another turning point or a bunch of turning points. But I think most of the world, and I find this in my own travels, doesn't hear Canada and think, oh, that must be cold, or that's far away, or you must go to the US a lot. The reaction I now get is, wow, what a cool country. You've got some really interesting people, and it's we've got a culture, whether it's Drake or Bieber or a lot of the films that we're making. People are seeing that around the world and seeing, we're not only good people, generous people, kind of cool. And I don't mean weather-wise to lots of the world.
I got a question early on here, John. I want to just move away from the book for 1 second. A question here from Kara. What was your biggest takeaway from your 25 years at the Globe and Mail?
The essential value of journalism, and I was there. The tech disruptions continue, and are an epic challenge to every publisher. We did a lot to try to turn that to an advantage in terms of the digital revolution and what it was doing to media. But I gained a deep and abiding respect for independent journalism. We've seen the value of this in all sorts of contexts in our world over the last while. But it's absolutely essential to democracy to have that sort of in an independent newsroom that is willing to try to unearth important facts and insights, as the saying goes, without fear or favor. And it doesn't matter what device you're on, what platform. I believe that continues.
Yeah, I saw this morning the New York Times announced that for the first time, they have more digital subscription revenue than print, and see this as a major shift. Uh, Not to get too far in the weeds here, but does it concern you at all that, like you use the U.S. as an example, we have the Washington Post, L.A. Times, and the New York Times, and those, like, it's hard for more regional locals to compete. Maybe, does that concern you at all?
Yeah, deeply, deeply. In fact, my previous book was called Mass Disruption, and it was about the media revolution. And in it, one of through my own experience in the industry, in it, that's one of the issues I try to explore is the kind of the decimation of local media, and I see that here in Canada. I'm fairly convinced there will for a long time, if not forever, be a CBC and a Globe and Mail and some sort of version of the National Post or of a National Post media chain. I worry about local publications. And there's lots of great entrepreneurs trying to wrestle with that. And I wish them well and hope we can find ways for them to succeed. But for all sorts of people who have local communities, local economies, local cultures, you need independent media, even sometimes when it's an irritant. In fact, that's good to have that irritant. It forces everyone to ask tough questions about themselves. But there isn't a terrific business model for that, and that's important. We like to say Canada is a community of communities. Well, those communities need independent media.
Yeah, we got a tough slug though as media, because a lot of discussions about the media and things like the now the new tag of if I don't agree with it, it's fake news, which has been used over the last 4 years in the U.S. a lot, but there's a lot of people using it on a lot of different sides now. How does the media shake that?
Yeah, well, I hope if we can move away from that demonization of media, we can have more serious conversations about the flaws of media, which are apparent and present in all kinds of media, left, right, doesn't matter. And it's not that they are evil, awful, or failed, but they make mistakes, as we all do, as I did when I was in media. And we need to better understand the systemic reasons for those flaws, rather than just individual mistakes, which happen, and then try to address those systemic reasons, rather than demonizing certain parts of the media and then doing nothing to help them improve.
The last thing a journalist wants is to get it wrong, and we all have experiences where we got it wrong, and it's not fun. And so it's that's the last thing that people want. The book is Planet Canada. There was a question here where we get it. Chapters would be a great spot, or order it through your local bookstore. Those would probably be the good answers, John?
That would be great. Great. I would love to support local booksellers. If you do not have a local bookseller, or you want to get the book for someone who is not near you geographically, absolutely go to Chapters Indigo. Use Amazon, or go to penguinrandomhouse.ca, or just Google Penguin Random House Canada, search for John Stackhouse. On the landing page, there's a navigation to take you to any retailer and order it that way.
Yeah, it's great stuff. Look at all I got all my little Post-its hanging out of it. So great stuff. John, like I said to you, I really enjoyed it, and I encourage all of our RealAg audience to check it out as well. John, thank you very much for joining us here today.
Oh, Shaun, it's always a pleasure to talk with you, but thank you, especially for this conversation.
Absolutely. Cheers. Okay, everybody, I encourage you to check out the book as we discussed. It is John Stackhouse's Planet Canada. I also want to remind you that today on RealAg Radio, on Rural Radio 147, we have a Farmer Rapid Fire. Great list of farmers from across the country. We're discussing what's going on their farms and their ranches. Today's special question for them is, If you could choose to farm in any decade, what decade would you choose? A lot of fun answers to that one for sure. Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Live. And we'll see you again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody.